Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're plunging straight into a pretty terrifying question. What actually happens when the rigid structures we built to protect our societies are shattered by raw, unfiltered intellectual honesty? We're going to explore a dark narrative called High Time and Sapphire Light. It's a grim Gothic parable that reads almost like a fierce diatribe. We're taking a deep dive into the violent destruction of predetermined order and the absolute chaos that follows when our deepest institutional illusions are finally laid bare.
So, the story kicks off with a lone, wretched scribe in a limestone chamber measuring exactly 6 paces by 4. I want you to picture him sitting there in the dark. He takes a steel quill, dips it into his ink, and firmly writes 2 simple words on a piece of rotting canvas: I am. He honestly believed that this meticulous ink could bind reality forever. By writing those words, he thought he was establishing this absolute, unyielding order for the world.
But here's the catch. By declaring his existence, the scribe unwittingly constructed what the text calls a Fitchean cell. Now, this isn't a physical jail you can touch. It's a psychological prison of his own making, built out of the static morality and rigid rules of an old kingdom, all cleverly masquerading as reason. He thought he was building an impregnable fortress for a society, right? But he was really just drawing a tightly constrained box around his own mind, effectively trapping himself in a temporary script.
Think about the stark contrast we're dealing with here. On one side, you have this suffocating limestone chamber, which represents the heavy, unyielding walls of the state and that rigid mask of reason. On the other side, we have the ultimate siege engine meant to destroy it, the ink blot of high time. This ink isn't structured at all. It is pure, wet, unshaped potentiality. It's literally a relentless drop of chaos being used as a weapon of narrative contamination against the scribe's supposedly perfect, ordered world.
And when that chaotic ink blot actually strikes those heavy stone walls, well, it unleashes this blinding eruption of sapphire light. The text is very clear that this light isn't some kind of magic. It's the visual representation of severe intellectual honesty. It's a truth so bright and so devastating that the old world desperately tries to dismiss it as unclean sorcery. But the reality is, once that light begins to shine, the dissolution of the kingdom absolutely cannot be stopped.
This sapphire light triggers what the fable calls the dark Camelot psychodrama, and the imagery here is just violently vivid. The scribe's pristine, modern Art Deco towers of progress don't just fall, they actively crumble and warp into rusted Arthurian armor. The comforting institutional fabrications of society are aggressively stripped away. In the blink of an eye, the rigid architecture of the state completely dissolves, and the definitive ink lines of the world melt into a dark, fractured purgatory. Now, from the very friction of this chaotic, dissolving ink, something entirely new is born. The sapphire light summons 3 distinct entities known as the spirit siblings of High Time. They emerge straight from the wreckage with one unified, devastating purpose: to brutally dismantle the old temporary scripts and prove once and for all that the rigid architecture of the state was always just a fragile, rotting illusion. So, who are these 3 siblings? The light summons 3 distinct nightmares, each with a highly specific function to dismantle the old world. First, we have the wit, acting as a priestly jester who drafts contracts of negation. Second, there's the hunger, a cosmic mind or bard who devours the empire's self-belief. And finally, the small gargoyle, a stunted creature that consumes corrupted noble shadows. Let's break down exactly how each of these siblings operates as an agent of philosophical chaos.
Let's dive into that first sibling, the wit. He manifests as a priestly jester, but trust me, he is not here to make you laugh. He aggressively mocks the scribe's so-called righteous law, drafting the very contracts of negation that the old order spent eons trying to deny. Through his mockery, he signs the death warrants of the old gods, reducing their once mighty institutions to hollow iron shells. His sole existence is to strip away society's fabrications.
But before we go any further, we really have to pause and ask ourselves a profound question. What is the psychological weight of this kind of absolute rebellion? The fable leans deeply into a Fitchean dynamic here, that agonizing tension between the self and the not-self. When we look at our own societal structures, it forces us to wonder if the rebels tearing down the system are truly free, or if they're just another necessary, programmed function of the structure itself.
In fact, the text refers to the wit as the not-self the self cannot abide, a dark, aggressive reflection that actually names itself the nichmich. The crucial point here is that the jester is heavily burdened. He is a tragic prisoner of his own predetermined purpose. His entire existence is designed solely to tear down his own reality. It's an agonizing realization that his chaotic rebellion is just as structurally mandated as the rigid order he's busy destroying.
Right behind that tragic jester looms our second sibling, the Hunger. This entity is a cosmic mind, acting as a sort of bard of the abyss. Wielding a kinetic, destructive power known as sapphire science, it relentlessly consumes the forbidden knowledge that the Empire's Pale Inquisitor tried so hard to lock away in an iron stove. The Hunger devours the very grammar of the Empire's self-belief, stripping away all the lofty rhetoric until absolutely nothing is left but the raw, unvarnished world. By drinking the living sapphire ink from the kingdom's hollow grail, the Hunger exposes a pretty devastating secret, the illusion of the quest for truth. The Empire's grand, noble search for meaning, it was never real. It was actually a controlled, highly predictable cycle of revolt and reset, carefully designed by the state to keep the kingdom dead, static, and forever secure from any genuine evolution. And finally, we come face to face with the third sibling, the small gargoyle. This is a stunted creature dressed in jester's motley, who crouches at the edge of a broken round table. But he doesn't eat bread. Instead, he feasts on the corrupted noble shadows of the citizens, specifically those who willingly submitted to the system and mistook their heavy chains for a rusted crown. He grows monstrously large on the rot hiding just beneath the kingdom's glittering artificial surface.
This brings us to a powerfully dark concept. The gargoyle exposes that all of the kingdom's glittering monuments to static morality were never built on actual virtue. They were forged from the crushing thou shalt of a historical dragon. This is a direct nod to Nietzschean philosophy, where the dragon represents the heavy, unquestionable commands and imposed values of society that demand absolute obedience from the individual. All of these forces combined lead to the complete disillusion of identity. This plays out in 3 agonizing stages of ideological collapse. Step 1, the severe truth, which the state branded as unclean sorcery, bubbles away the institutional lies. Step 2, the so-called righteous order is revealed to be nothing but a fabrication that you denied the loudest. And Step 3, the old gods inevitably fall to the jester's absolute contracts of negation.
The ultimate casualty of this devastating siege is the Knight of the Iron Word. This figure represents the absolute, unyielding defender of the old state. When the jester finally confronts him, the knight doesn't fall in some glorious, heroic battle. Under the intense glare of the sapphire light, he simply shatters into the suffocating dust of his own dead morality. The psychological weight of realizing his entire code was a lie completely erases him from existence.
Here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. The Mirror of High Time is entirely impartial. It doesn't offer us a new paradise, and it frankly doesn't care at all about our modern political squabbles of left or right, good or evil. It simply reflects the cold, hard reality that the old righteous order was just a mask. The abyss doesn't take sides, it just effortlessly consumes the illusions we build to make ourselves feel safe.
And that leaves us here. The city walls are utterly gone. The definitive ink lines of the world, the rigid boundaries of that limestone chamber from the very beginning of our story, have completely dissolved into purgatory. You are left standing in the quiet, gray twilight of an unwritten horizon. The old script is completely dead, and the page is blank once more.
Which brings us to the ultimate consequence of absolute freedom. As we wrap up this explainer, you are left staring into that very same abyss. Now that the walls are completely gone and the ink is wet with raw potential, how will your trembling hand bear the heavy burden of writing the next line? Thanks for exploring this dark fable with me today. Keep questioning the walls around you.